So you should get the approval box now. If you came in a little late, I did ask everyone to type their name and organization in the chat just so we could get to know each other. We're excited to be here with you today. I've got my close peer, Claire Otterbein, with me from United Way. We're sharing this presentation today as we do with many of our capacity building programs. So we're really excited to talk to you today. This is our 4th DEI session this year. We did a 3-part series in the spring. And this is actually the outgrowth of that series and the feedback that we got from everyone. You know, we got some feedback that in the coming months after that series ended, many of you would be ready to start doing the real nuts and bolts work of this in your organization. And we wanted to just provide you with some additional resources and sort of industry trends on how to start that work if you're not familiar with it. We also are going to give you, and so I guess I'll move, actually, let me advance the slides a minute. There's Claire and I and our contact information. So if there's anything that either one of us are talking about today that you would like to follow up on, we'd be happy for you to do that. I will send the slides out, and in the slides are various linked resources, different assessments, different tools, some research and other things that you'll want to probably follow up on. So feel free to do that, but give us a call if you have any challenges or email us. And we've already gone through all of this. So here's our agenda. We will do our introductions in the chat. We are going to look at one specific assessment tool, and then I'm going to link you to a couple of other assessment tools as sort of starting points to research and organize your organization around these DEI initiatives. We're also going to take a deeper dive into 2 subsections of one of the tools that we're digging into. So we're going to look at policy and data. There's about that tool has 12 different sort of focus areas. And so we picked 2 that we thought were really meaningful. And Claire and I will talk to you a little bit more about those. And then, like I said, we'll have some web resources and some general conversation. So I'm going to jump in because we have about 75 minutes reserved. We might not need all that time, but again, we wanted to be able to talk. So I will jump in. Actually, Claire's going to jump in. This is the slide that Claire's going to start on. But I do want to mention that this tool, we linked it on the slides. All these tools are linked on the slides because they are not our tools. We did not create this content. There's a ton of great content out there that you can get from your regional alliances, your regional peers, the foundations that are around you, the types of groups that do this work are already providing amazing tools. So there's the tool link right there, the Meyer's DEI Spectrum tool, if you want to investigate this further after the session. And I'm going to turn it over to Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Sure. So yes, this is an assessment tool called the Meyer Memorial Trust Assessment Tool. And like Heather said, this is just one of many, and we're going to share some resources about others you can access, but this is free and available. And one of the things that I particularly like about it, you know, it's focused on the organizational level, not, you know, individual beliefs and that sort of thing. And it's also very, very thorough. Like Heather said, it's got these 12 different things, which we'll go through really quickly because we're just going to focus on those 2, as Heather said. And what you're seeing on the screen is for each of those 12 categories, the ultimate goal. You know, this is what you would hope to be if you were exemplary in this particular category. But the actual tool has 5 different steps along the way, going from like, we haven't really started work in this area to, you know, we are really a leader in this area and have best practices in place. And so you can then see where you fall. It has really good descriptors for each of those places along the spectrum for each of them. And, you know, I like this one so much that I actually took the content and sort of, I think I was using Constant Contact or something, you know, to make a survey, an online survey version of it to share with our board and staff. We haven't actually had them complete that yet, but that's the plan. And so I think it'll be really interesting, not just to see responses, but where there's like a disagreement, you know, about where we are in the responses. And I think I included, when I built it that way, also an opportunity for the respondents to choose that they don't feel like they know enough to say, like they don't know what we're doing, what our policies are, or what our practices are for that particular area. So I think that would be useful for us to collect as well. So just going through very quickly, I think everybody's probably familiar with what a vision is, just like you have a vision for your overall organization. Do you have a vision related to DEI commitment? Is this a priority for your organization? And are you actually then doing the work to make that happen? Leadership is really a people-based. So, in terms of your staff and board leadership, is there diversity and inclusion there? Policies is one, it's in yellow because Heather's going to take us on a deeper dive to talk about policies and best practices related for that. Infrastructure is almost sort of like cultural, like has DEI work become just a part of everything you do in your organization and all of your decision making. Training, again, straightforward. Are you offering those opportunities for your staff and your board and your volunteers? Diversity sounds very general. It's like this is the whole thing is about diversity. But in this context, they're really looking at it sort of related again to HR and staff and board, but do you have those policies and procedures in place, and are you using them to support having diversity across the organization in that way? And then we're going to, what's next here? We've got infrastructure, training, diversity. So I think we're going to move to the next slide, Heather, please, for the rest of the 12. There we go. So data, again, that's the one I'm going to take a closer look at with our group in a little bit. Community is really about partnerships. It's about outreach efforts and your work in that. Accountability. I skipped decisions. Again, decisions, sort of there's some overlap there, similar to infrastructure and in getting at the culture. Is this part of your culture of your organization in everything that you do? Accountability is, again, related to the data piece there about, so you've got your data, you're collecting your data, hopefully you're using best practices with that. And so now do you have something in place to make sure that, you're moving forward in your process the way you want to based on that information. And inclusion, again, another sort of broad cultural kind of component that includes staff, board, outreach, sort of the whole thing. And so again, like what you're seeing here for each of these is the ultimate goal of where we would all like to be. But I do really like the language throughout this particular tool about all the steps along the way, because it is a process and we're all working towards it. And although we have these ultimate goals, it's sort of never ending work, and we know that. So that's just a little overview of what you find in that particular tool. Heather, did you want to add anything before you move on to your policy piece?
No, I think that was great, Claire. Thank you. So we're going to take a few minutes now to really dig into policy, because this is the place where I think, based on our feedback from earlier this year, this is the place where many of us are sort of ready to jump into. We're trying to figure out across our organizations, what are the areas that we can start looking at the initiatives and where can we actually make a difference? And what are the actual practices that we can do to make a difference? And so I made just some notes here on a few slides, but I thought we could talk through them. And particularly, and this is an area where I'd like to invite people to tell us if you've had a really good experience or a really challenging experience and how you resolve that in your organization as you were doing some of this work. Because it is sometimes an uncomfortable space, and a space that many of us don't feel like we're expert content, knowledge people in. And so it creates some anxiety. And for most of us, we really want to get this right. We really want to figure it out, learn it, and do it the right way. And so that's why we're having these kind of sessions. So let's jump in. Organizational values, Claire mentioned that earlier. Of course, when we, as a nonprofit, we're familiar with writing our basic values, our basic strategic mission, vision, and values. But this really speaks more to what is your commitment to diversity and inclusion, and how are you integrating that not only into your written values, but your acted out culture and values. So for this one, what you're typically looking for is a firm that has deliberately worked to promote diversity and ensures that each individual that is employed with them has access to continued growth, whatever their challenges might be, whatever their barriers might be, whatever the differences are in the organization, that there's, an intent focus on ensuring that everyone has equal opportunity for success. That could be access to leadership positions, that could be access to professional development, that could be access to flexible work situations because of the various requirements of our lives as individuals. And so it's just, thinking a little deeper into what are your internal policies? Where can you address diversity in your internal policies? And that's kind of what this whole section is about. So you'll hear some of these concepts mentioned more than once. I know that I'm going to talk again probably about flexible workplaces later on in another section, but that's become something since the pandemic that we've realized is really a key concern for employees. And we are a very diverse set of people in every workplace. And the flexibility that many individuals need to be able to support their families and the number of challenges that their families might be facing is something that we have to keep in mind and consider, as we're moving forward, because we've already learned this is not a short-term situation. We're not even in the medium-term scenario anymore. We're entering the long-term scenario, which initially we weren't sure exactly how long that was going to last. But now we know it's likely going to last 2+ years. And the effect of what's going on right now on our workplaces and our diversity is also going to go out even beyond that. All of these things that we're all dealing with individually in our organizations as we work remotely, work hybrid, change the formats of how we do our work, deal with the challenges, that the pandemic has put on our lives, makes organizations need to work even harder in this area to help people feel included and accepted. And it's not easy work. So there is some guidance out there on this piece of it, the types of things that you could really do to make a difference. But just keep in mind that the key is, it's one thing to do the work to create a strategic vision that includes DEI, a public viewpoint, public transparency of what your organization values DEI as, but it's a whole nother thing to actually implement it. And so that's why we wanted to sort of give you some of these tips. Recruitment and hiring, that is an area where here on the Eastern Shore can be very challenging. In rural areas, diverse hiring strategies require effort. It's not always the easiest process to find the skill sets, the background, the diversity that you're looking for to bring into your organization. And so if you look at some of the human resource alliances or associations like SHRM, they'll give you guidance on this. They can help you think through, what are the actual practices through considering prospective people would make a difference. And so, some of the top keys are like making sure that you're seeking diverse candidates by having your application accessible in a variety of places, not just in one standard place, making sure that it's available in different kinds of formats and in different places in communities. Seeking recruiters or companies to help you with that diversity initiative in hiring, to finding experts that can really help you sort of look at what you're doing and figure out how you could, help with that. You can also set for your organization, this is a really high level goal, but it does help. You can set a goal, set an actual measurable goal to diversifying your staff and to hiring diverse people from your applicant pool. So, an example could be, you could say something like, or you could strategically organize a statement like, in the next 5 years, any positions that we hire, this is what we will strive to do. Maybe it's, we're going to have at least 30% of the applicant pool come from diverse backgrounds, or we're going to interview a certain percent of diverse applicants in that process. And so just making sure that you're addressing all the little nuts and bolts pieces will really make a difference. You can also, another thing that's really easy to do in this area is to just train yourself, your recruiters and your interviewers a little bit more in how to have conversations with diverse applicants and how to.
I hear that. So do you want to meet for lunch or not?
And how to work through the interview process and mitigate implicit bias. We had a whole session on implicit bias in the spring, we actually recorded that. So if implicit bias is of interest to you, I'll when I send this PowerPoint, I'll send 2 of the 3 sessions in the spring were recorded. And that was one of them. And we had some wonderful speakers that talked about implicit bias. And in the end of our PowerPoint, one of the tools we're going to show you is an implicit bias set of tools. And doing that work as individuals can really change your frame of reference as you're doing recruiting and interviewing. And so those are things to think about there. Retention. Retention is usually the next part of, attracting diverse staff. When it comes to retention, you're looking at things like having policies in place to, again, talk about implicit bias in your workplace, to have workplace inclusive training, to talk to the rest of your staff about, this shared diversiveness of your workplace, what the differences are, what the similarities are, what that means for all of us, how we support each other in our goals and in our needs, that are very different. So that's some of the things. There's a lot of other stuff. I don't want to dig too much into retention, but there is a lot of stuff out there, like I said, in human resource groups like SHRM. You can go to SHRM's website or groups like that, Human Resource Alliances, and find tons of stuff on this piece, recruitment and retention, particularly. It can help to, when you're creating your vision and values, it can also help to have a document that you can use in your recruiting process and during your interview process that sort of talks to the fact that you're creating or have an inclusive culture and that you will do this work and that you have measurable goals. It helps to interface like that and be transparent with the community about that process. And then and the slides here, it mentions some of the other things that you can do is participate in local initiatives, affinity groups, and just, like I said, go over all of your internal policies and see, what's missing there and actually implement the practices, not just put them in the policies. I'm actually going to present the next few items, and then we'll open the floor for conversation. Professional development and advancement. This one's huge. An organization should try, and I know it's challenging in the nonprofit sector, and I know it's challenging in the rural area, but we should try really hard to gain access for our employees to have professional development, to have leadership advancement opportunities, to be coached, to be mentored, and wherever it is they see themselves growing in the future. And that, that can be very positive for workplace morale, for individual flexibility and ability to interrelate with leaders. When an individual feels supported in the workplace in this way, despite any perceived challenges or barriers or differences, this makes a real difference in people's life. And I have friends, I've always been blessed with my career here at the foundation to have a lot of support in this area, but I have many friends who aren't able to get that kind of access to support in their organization. So I've been able to see personally, what it's like to have an organization that's committed and finds a way to make it work and to see the other side of that. There are a lot of resources in this area too that could be currently, because of the pandemic, can be secured remotely, can be downloaded from a variety of websites. There are many of us in the community doing this sort of strategic capacity building work that are happy to have conversations with you offline and help you find those resources or help you think through some of the challenges, as you're doing this work in your organization. And so just know that you don't have to really invent the wheel here, but there are a lot of new and exciting things going on in this area of professional development. Mentoring is something that if you are willing and able to assign associates a member or assign staff a member of the community that can mentor, whether it's inside your organization, outside your organization, if you can find them resources for mentoring, that could be a great thing, professional coaching or mentoring, but personal development happens through that also. And then also falling under this for advancement is performance reviews. I have to say that sometimes in our sector, we don't quite have the same viewpoint on performance reviews and advancement as the corporate world does or as the for-profit world does. And that's for a whole variety of reasons. And I'm not going to get into any of that today, but I would just encourage you all to think about your performance process. Do you have a firm performance process that also has constructive, collaborative, and fair feedback, that has corrective action tools in place, that once you identify, things can help someone that really wants to do the work with you grow, continue to grow and excel. That's really important. If an individual is not getting direct feedback or cyclical, regular organizational performance feedback, it can really, again, create the culture and morale issues. And it's even more challenged by DEI, focusing on DEI specific issues. So we would encourage you to look at your advancement strategies, look at your current mechanisms for performance review and improvement, and think about what you can do for your employees in that way. Leadership, diversity in leadership, another huge one. If you have employees that are interested in growing into a leadership role or developing themselves towards a leadership role, be fair and transparent about those conversations. Try to figure out how you can set goals to, again, have measurable goals to offer a certain percent of people in your organization a certain level of access to training. If you have to rotate, I've seen this before, that a strategy for a lot of nonprofits and their budgets is to rotate access to professional development or advancement opportunities. And so if there is an expense associated with it, especially a considerable expense, sometimes you can rotate that throughout your staff as you're doing evaluations and learning what the expectations of individuals are. You can work that into a plan, for leadership and advancement. And there's around leadership advancement, another thing that is helpful is if you are transparent with your staff about the opportunities for growth. When you're having these performance reviews with them and you're working through regular constructive feedback, talk to them about their interest in growth, whether it's education or into leadership roles or into other strategic work in your organization, and figure out, what you can do to help them advance in that way. And this might be the kind of conversation that some of us have never really started having with the people within our organization, or maybe we've had some of the conversations, but we've never really focused on it with the clear intent of making it happen, and so to actually do this work, you have to make it happen. And so I'm going to mention measurable goals a lot of times, because we talk about that a lot in program evaluation as grant makers. Claire and our organization are both grant makers. And so measurable goals can be such a powerful way. Measurable goals and measurable check-ins can be such a powerful way to drive your organization forward in a strategic effort. And there's so many possibilities for setting measurable goals for DEI. And again, if it's not your forte or it's not something that excites you, pull in some assistance. There's peers, there's your funders, there's partners, there's affinity groups, and it's not something that you have to create a whole new matrix for. There are things out there already. Job descriptions for leadership position should be accessible, should be transparent, so that everyone in your organization can see, what a leader in their organization is, tasked with, what their work looks like, what kind of requirements that position has for education or for experience or any of those things. Making those things accessible to everyone can help all of us, with our own goals and with our own growth interests. So consider that as well. There's all sorts of HR practices as it relates to job descriptions and professional development within organizations, but being more transparent about the processes for that advancement opportunity and that development opportunity will really be a great tool for addressing your DEI initiatives in your organization. And then lastly, before I open it up, participation and support in affinity groups can be a really powerful tool as you're going through all of these processes. And like I mentioned, there's a great number of them out there. So one of the things that you can do is reach out to your funders, to your partners, to your shareholders, to the alliances. We're giving you some of those resources on these slides today. you know, when you leave today, maybe you'll start thinking about some of these things and you'll decide to go ahead and start making this kind of commitments. But an example of how you can make a commitment to this effort is to have, again, a measurable goal, to set a measurable goal on how our organization is going to diversify in this way. And so you might set a target, work with your team and set a target to identify some of these agencies or groups to create partnerships with and start working on your initiatives with. You could also maybe set in your professional development guidelines some way to recognize employees that are individually doing this work. They're individually developing themselves by sitting on, going to training sessions, sitting on calls, working in these alliances, holding local conversations about it, maybe participating in leadership initiatives or diversity initiatives outside of your organization in their own time. Those are the kind of things that you can also boost, an individual within your organization with, and they'll bring back all these wonderful things to your organization, but you can acknowledge that they're doing that work themselves by maybe, recognizing that in some way. And you would probably, if you're going to focus on that, you'll probably want to set a list of what those things look like. Is it holding a leadership role in a certain affinity group or with a certain local team or committee? Is it participating in some part of your own DEI initiatives? Is it going to educational sessions? So you'll want to sort of spell out in a policy what those things would be if you are going to formally recognize people and encourage them to do that kind of work. But that can be an amazing way to, again, encourage all of our employees from all backgrounds to be able to be involved in this work, and that it won't be just driven from the strategic executive level down to the staff, that it's more broad and inclusive. And so, I moved the slide. I'd like to open up the floor for conversation. This is just a brief step into policy, but again, it's a huge area, and realize that all of us, when we're doing these sort of strategic projects, have to path out phases of approaching all of these different things. And so don't let this section overwhelm you. It is a lot of content, but you wouldn't be moving through all this in a day or a week or a month. You would probably be strategizing and phasing certain aspects of it in. So I would love to open the floor now. If anyone would like to have a conversation about any of these, I can move back to the other slide as well. What I would particularly be interested in is knowing if anyone has made, real progress in any of these areas locally. If you're willing to share that progress or share a challenge that you've overcome in any of these areas as you've been on your DEI path, that would be wonderful. Feel free to jump in. While we're thinking about that, actually, I'm going to run a poll real quick. I've got a general poll about strategies, and I just wanted to see where everybody sort of sits within their organization on their focus for this. So while you're thinking about, if you have anything you'd like to chat about, take that poll for us. That'd be great. If you have any questions about these specific policy indicators, I'll put a couple of links in the follow-up information to where you could dig a little deeper into these. You can also get on the web, you can also gain access to actual policies, like sample policies and sample documents that can help you through this process. And you'll see some of those links on the websites that we send you. Okay, results are coming in. I'm just gonna let that sit for 1 second. The flexible work arrangements and flexible work policies, I said I was going to mention that a couple of times. Like I said, the pandemic has really changed that for a lot of us. So recognizing that, your individuals in your organization are dealing with whatever your policies are for parental leave, for neutral flex time, for, off the shelf sort of flexible changing of hours. What does that look like? When you have someone in a workplace that has barriers or challenges in their everyday life, and they're trying to give as much as they can to you, but realizing that they also need to give in their other areas of life. What does that look like? Do you have policies that allow people to flex on the fly or to flex in certain situations? What do your parental leave policies say? Looking at some of those things can be really helpful. And I think that I know that from some of our previous conversations in this area, that is somewhat of an uncomfortable dynamic for some organizations. Like even now at, I don't know, what are we, 16 months out or something? I'm losing track of time. Some of our organizations are still not sure, like how they feel about some of the things that they have been forced to offer employees or forced to sort of manage their workflow, because of the pandemic. And I would again mention that this is going to be a long-term impact. So if you haven't started thinking about what that looks like long-term, you probably should start doing that, because I think that this has opened up a lot of our minds and thought processes to what work could look like in the future within our organization, what the actual flow of work could look like, where people are, how many hours they're working, where are they located, what technology do they have? All of those things factor into the need for flexibility. Okay, I'm going to share this back out. It looks like we've got most of our results. So 60% of us have developed a DEI policy for our organizations. Oh, and 70% of us maintain data on the demographics of the people we serve. And then 80% of us are building intentional relationships. That's wonderful. Those are excellent results. Would anyone like to say anything at this point? If not, we'll move on, but I wanted to give everybody a chance. Questions, thoughts, anything that excites you? Okay, we'll move on. And we're going to hop over to Claire now.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about data related to DEI. And, the ultimate goal, of course, for our organizations are that we're collecting this data, we're analyzing the data, and then we're using it to help guide our decisions related to programs, related to our larger organizational goals. But of course, that is a process and it takes a while to get there. So what we're going to talk about is some things to think about if you are sort of at the beginning of starting to collect this data, or maybe you are collecting some and you want to expand and improve. And so we'll start by talking about internal data. And I think that the automatic thing that we think about when we think about data related to DEI is demographic information. So information about people, right? And so I think the first couple of those that you see there in the left-hand column, staff, board, clients, like those are the automatic things we think about. And I did single out clients or program participants because that's kind of what we'll focus on moving forward. Since that's a lot of what our work, I think, is about, our community-based work. But there are some demographic things that you might not think about, things like vendors. If you're contracting with companies, are you looking at, are these, is there minority-led companies represented, female-owned companies? And do you want to pay attention to that? Do you want to think about that? And also leadership, if you have active partnerships, ongoing partnerships with organizations, what does the leadership look like there? So those might be some things to think about. And if you are at the beginning stages and you're thinking about demographic data, and do you want to collect that? Do you want to expand what you're collecting? Because of course the data, we're thinking about things like race and ethnicity, gender, maybe sexual orientation, income level might be something, abilities, there are lots of different pieces to demographic data, of course. And so if you are at the beginning and you feel that you need some guidance, I think for many of us, we feel like some of these data points might be sensitive information. And we, as Heather said, we want to know that we're, handling the process correctly. There are resources out there for best practices. And one that I like is something called, it's a report called More Than Numbers, a guide towards DEI and data collection. And it's a pretty brief, sort of beginner friendly. It's from the Schusterman Foundation, Family Foundation. It's available free to download. And like I said, it's not a super overwhelming document. So I think it's a good starter. And it gives you tips on doing the collection of demographic data in a sound and respectful way. So, things you might want to consider, like if you're asking these questions, why are you asking them? Is there a good reason? You don't want to be asking for information that you're not going to do anything with. And then being able to communicate that to, who you're collecting the information from. Why are you asking? What are you going to do with it? Getting people's consent to do that, offering things like offering, a prefer not to answer selection, for things, so people can opt out in that way. Other considerations might be, when you're having choices, the way that you choose to order them. So are you doing it alphabetically so that, there's some sort of reason behind why you have that. So there's lots of good suggestions like that in there, laid out in a really clear and accessible way, and a lot of good examples. So I think we'll have that on a slide to show you where you can access that, and we'll send that out, of course, the slide deck afterwards, so you can find that. But there are some things beyond demographics that you might want to think about tracking, and some of these Heather sort of touched on. So, in terms of HR, like if you're looking at a larger staff, are people being promoted on the same timeline, across the board? Maybe that's something you want to think about. Heather touched on too about professional development opportunities specifically devoted to DEI. That could be a really easy beginner one for a smaller organization. Maybe it's just been something you've offered, sort of willy-nilly here and there, but you're going to commit to, like, once a year we're going to have this for our staff. That could be a very easy thing to track and follow through with. Your outreach, when you go out and do those outreach events, or however you're handling that through partnerships, are you targeting particular audiences and trying to make sure that you're getting the word out to everyone in the community that you want to reach? And do you want to then collect data to make sure that you're meeting those goals that you've set? If you generate a lot of marketing materials and you use images of humans, what do those people look like? Is everybody being represented? That's part of your community, and to track that kind of data point. And a lot of data, I think we tend to think of quantitative data, we're looking at numbers. That's what data is numbers, right? But that's not the only kind of data. And so thinking about qualitative data as well, getting, whether it's observation, whether it's sort of feedback from people, to make sure that you're thinking about that as well. And so, my little point for this slide was, if you're at the beginning, pulling together what you already track, is a good way to begin, because you might be surprised. You might be collecting things you didn't really think about, or you've never really looked at it together, or your team has never brought it all together. But you might find that you do have some information you didn't realize, or of course it will also show you, where those gaps are that you might want to start tracking. So if you are at the beginning stages, and, because of my professional background, I tend to think about smaller organizations and organizations with fewer resources, so that's who I'm frequently thinking about in these presentations. But, certainly it's not like you're going to jump in and start tracking all of these points or every point, but you can start by choosing a few that are meaningful to you, just like Heather said, and setting some goals. And then, that is a good place to jump in and start the work. And so we can move on, and so, phasing things in. You're not going to take it all in from the beginning. And so that was internal data, but of course, external data is out there, and that can be a really helpful thing as well. So locally, there are lots of assessments and data that you can get at various levels, whether it's highly local or state or regional or whatever, that you can look into. And some of them might be specific to your particular, mission focus and that kind of thing. If you're trying to get external data and you don't know where to look, certainly United Way and Community Foundation Heather and I can give you some advice about trying to direct you. I think we do that a lot. We get a lot of requests for looking for that, so we can help lead you to some external data resources that touch on DEI in various ways that you might want to look at that. One of them I put there, the United for Alice online data tool. So the Alice report, if you're not familiar, is a report on financially struggling families. And so it's a state level report, but it has county level data available as well. And through those online data tools, it does allow you at the county level to get some demographic breakdown on financially struggling families. So you can find things like, race and ethnicity, age, single parents, and that kind of thing. So that is just one example that you might want to access. And if you're looking for that and you're having trouble navigating those data tools, you can certainly reach out to me for help on that. And other organizations, partnering with other organizations that you might work through your programs, whether that's a school for a youth program or something, can be resources to feed you external data that you might find useful. And then of course, like what you're hoping to do is to, get that external data and let that inform what you're going to be tracking internally. Like, how does that all fit together? And the reason I put think creatively there is just because I think probably we've all had the experience of you're hoping to find a specific data point that we're looking for, and it's not out there. No one's collecting and publishing that exactly what we hope to find, when we're putting in maybe that funding application or whatever, we want to talk about a particular need. But, because of that, because there are limitations to what's available, sometimes you have to think about ways you might be able to use the data that is available to you and then extrapolate from there in order to present something meaningful about the outcomes and effectiveness of your programs and things like that. So just some things to think about. And like I said, Heather and I are usually pretty good at helping to find resources. And again, we're talking about, I'm always thinking like free resources, free data available through public, reports that you can access. And again, to see where things link together with what you're internally doing with your programs and what is happening in the larger community. And so I think we can move on to the next one here. So again, I think a lot of us, on this process related to DEI data, maybe we're collecting some things, and then maybe we're thinking about collecting some more things. And now what are we going to do? What do we do with it? Like, what do that is sometimes the sticking point of how do we move forward with the information that we have. So this is just some thoughts about as you move forward. Again, we talked about selecting a few things that you think you can track, you have the resources to track and the bandwidth, and then maybe you make a little dashboard to keep track of that. And then the thing about tracking is you got to keep doing it to see what's happening and to see if you're meeting your goals. So making a commitment to doing that over time. And the hope is, with looking at those external pieces as well, you'll get a better understanding of what might be out there in the community already and where you as an organization can help fill those gaps. So certainly don't need to be duplicating efforts, and starting to look more deeply and intentionally of like, what are the root causes of these issues in the community that our organizations are trying to address. And again, with the, I think in terms of narratives, we are all using narratives to communicate the impact of what our organizations are doing in the community. That's how we tell our stories. And so thinking about, I saying that apply an equity lens. So I think what I have come across in a lot of my work with organizations is you may not in the past have conceived of your programs as addressing anything related to DEI in the community, anything related to equity and disparities, because, you're just serving whoever needs the service. And, That's the way that you have always thought about it. But if through your external data exploration, you're realizing, well, this health program that our organization does, there's really disparities in the community related to this particular issue. And, through the internal data that we've started to collect, we've done a ton of outreach to these particular communities and that have the disparities. And we're actually like making an impact here. So you are doing work that is impacting, DEI in the community, that is addressing, in that example, disparities related to health. So starting to look at things in a way that encompasses that you may never have really thought about. It's your same program, it might be the same data, but you're just looking at it in a new and different way. Again, like sharing the data out, hopefully it's informing your internal stuff, but maybe you want to find organizations that are doing complementary work and decide to share that data with one another to see what the bigger picture of the community and that particular need that you're addressing looks like. And I think can be a really good thing. And sometimes we don't think about that. And maybe that's a formal partnership if you need that, about what you're going to share and on what timeline and that sort of thing. But maybe it's not. Maybe you work closely with these organizations already and feel like, you can have sort of an informal data sharing as well. Getting feedback about the from the communities and people with lived experience related to what you're collecting the data on can also be really an important step, because that can give you context. It can give you, again, some of that qualitative data that you might find useful. And I think it's also important, we think of, well, maybe not, but some people think of data as, this is like a science thing and it's numbers, and numbers don't lie, they're just numbers. But of course, data can be subject to bias just like anything else. So, what you decide to collect, how you collect it, how you analyze it. So that's just something to think about as well, going forward. So you want to make sure that all your stakeholders are able to have input in all of that. And of course, advocacy can be supported by your data, internal and external as well, to guide those efforts for change in the community. So those are just some pieces to maybe get you started in thinking about it. And then I wanted to share, if we move on, one more slide, just one more. Thank you. So I just wanted to share an example, because at United Way, we are working on this process, just like Heather said. We're all of our organizations are in the process of this and wanting to do better. So this is just an example from one of the direct service programs that we offer, Imagination Library, which you might be familiar with. It's an early childhood literacy program. And so one of the ways that we have traditionally measured the impact of that program is by collecting data on the kindergarten readiness assessment, which is we call the KRA, which is the test that incoming kindergartners take here in our counties to assess, the skills that they have that will help them succeed in kindergarten. So we have formed a partnership of many years with our boards of education for the counties we serve, and they feed us that data so that we can see, the difference between the scores of students who participate in this program and those that have not. And so that helps us, with that outcome. That's outcome data for us. And we have received specific data about farm eligibility, so free and reduced meals. So that's a way of helping us measure the impact, particularly on lower income children, which is something we are particularly interested in. But we have never asked before about any data being disaggregated in other ways. But so what we plan to do, part of our plan to better our DEI data collection for this specific program, is to start requesting it to be broken down by race and ethnicity. And I'm not sure, what they're going to be able to do with that. I'm hoping that they will have that data to share with us. And of course, I should clarify too, that all of this data that comes to us from them has personally identifying information, taken out. But I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that for us. So, trying to, again, think, innovatively about solutions if we come across that problem is, if we can get it broken down by school of entry for those incoming kindergartners. And we do have basic demographic information about the schools. And so we could potentially extrapolate from there if we were trying to, having to find another path to get better information on that. And another thing is, tracking the outreach that we do. We do a ton of outreach for this program. We've always tried to focus it on lower income, also non-English speaking families or English as a second language families, and also, students that might have learning disabilities and particularly need the support of the program. But we've never particularly tracked how we're doing that or what our goals might be for that. And of course, outreach looks different these days with COVID, but still outreach. And so we're going to start intentionally keeping track of how we're doing that. And part of what led us to that was really the fact that in the last year and a half, I would say we've been part of a lot of community-based outreach events that had a lot of attendance by Spanish-speaking families. And we distributed more Spanish language Imagination Library brochures in the last year and a half than we had, I don't know. I mean, we really have gone through very much, which is exciting for us that we're reaching that community, but makes us realize that we should have been more intentional about that all along, and we should be paying attention to the metrics around that so we can see how we're doing and continue to see. So that's just one example of how we are approaching one particular program and the data. But I'm happy to, I would love to hear from other organizations about either something they've done that's successful around this or something they're hoping to do and looking for advice on ways to move forward with it.
Thank you, Claire. That was wonderful. I really appreciate the real life example about data management. Like you said, it can be really hard to start thinking through that process. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's a lot like what, like I said, I'm always thinking about small organizations that have very limited resources. So manageable things that you can do with tools you already have and that aren't going to create a tremendous burden. Most of our organizations on the lower shore, like how many have like a data analysis and collection department? Like, we would dream of that, but most of us don't have access to something like that. We don't have access to, the funding to contract someone to do that. So, starting with ways that are really doable for your organization. I mean, that's how you begin it.
And thank you for offering to be a resource for that piece offline. I know that here in our office, Lauren and I sometimes have conversations with nonprofits, particularly that are focused on program evaluation or development, and we can help in that way because we see and talk to a lot of organizations. Even when it's not our direct work, we kind of know what the trends and norms are for how you evaluate certain types of work. And so we can help in that way too, to keep both of us in mind. And then I have a couple of slides. I wanted to just, if the tool that we showed you earlier, the 12-part tool is not quite, on your wavelength or not quite what you want for your organization, I wanted to just show you that there are a couple of other ones. I mean, there's many of them, but there's a couple that we know about particularly. And the first one is Maryland Nonprofits. Maryland Nonprofits is the regional sort of state nonprofit support entity. And they have wonderful capacity building resources, educational packets, informational material on their website. Some of it is free, some of it is not, because they are a membership organization. I wanted to share their information though, because they are a powerful partner and they do have members from our area of Maryland. As we have existing members from the Eastern Shore with Maryland nonprofits. And so the value of that is that they understand the challenges of the Eastern Shore and how it's different from some of the other more urban areas when you're looking at DEI. And what they offer right now is an educational packet based on the standards of excellence, which are real focused best practices for DEI. And what they offer right now is basically 3 different versions of an assessment tool, which is a survey tool that you could apply in your organization. They offer them with different demographic focuses or audience focuses. So you could get a tool that specifically looks at staff feedback. You could get one that looks at board feedback, and you can get one that's really broad, that spans across all the pieces of nonprofits, organization. But I really like, I really like working with them because they know our language, they know our area. If you are discouraged by them, if you want to access this resource and you aren't able to, and you're discouraged by the membership fee, let me or them know. Their membership manager's name is Darius, and Darius does an amazing job offering very low cost and, if possible, free access to some of their resources, particularly for Eastern Shore nonprofits, because they understand the revenue challenges that we face. There is also a program at Maryland Nonprofits called the Nonprofit Development Center that gets state revenue streams attached to it that enables brand new nonprofits to get free membership to Maryland Nonprofits and to access all of their benefits, paid or not. So Darius can help you get access to that program too. If you're curious about it, it's called the Nonprofit Development Center. It's operated strictly through Maryland Nonprofits. And so I just want to encourage you to keep them in mind as a potential resource. Claire and I looked over these tools last week, and they're great tools. They really have it dialed in to, the types of things that we're looking at and the types of things that we're focusing on. And then in this little narrative here, I just pulled this off their website, so you could see how their approach to this work is. And they speak to some of the same things that we already have, that self-assessments and this work of DEI should be broad and diverse. It shouldn't be done from the top down. It should be done across the organization with all of your staff, all your volunteers, all your stakeholders. And so these tools can help you start getting some of that feedback together to start working on that strategically. So I put the link right here in the bottom of the slide, so you can check that out. And then I wanted to mention this because we had this on one of our previous sessions and really had great feedback on it. This set of tools is called an implicit association test, or an IAT. It's provided by Harvard. And I don't know if you've ever done an IAT test. I've got an example on the next slide because it's very different than any other kind of survey or test. It works differently. The way that you answer the test and fill in the responses is just very different than the way we typically do things. But it basically sorts images and words into groups. And you're doing that by putting two fingers on the keyboard and using your conscious and unconscious mind to type those things and to identify them. And it will tell you at the end what your specific implicit biases might be, or what type of category you fall in as an individual. So this is an individual type of test, but it can be a low stress sort of introduction to some of these processes of doing that self inspection, of our own, how we interrelate with people in our organizations and people in the community. And so I want to encourage you, these are free tools. There's about between 12 and 15 different subtopics of IAT tests on this site. And this is just one of the IAT sites that's out there, but it's really easy and free. And so I'll show you on the next slide. This is what it kind of looks like. I just copied out a couple of screenshots. So they set you up with, like, this was a 6-part questionnaire. And so they give you statements that you're classifying as currently true or false. So as you're taking this test, are you playing football? Are you sunbathing at the beach? Are you playing an electric guitar? And it just goes from there. So you're just coding them. And then in the next section, you can see how they set you up for coding. So you're using the E and the I keys on your keyboard and you're moving through. And the really interesting thing about these tests is the way that it works is they flip the dynamics on the typing. The E and the I assignments change throughout the screens. So you really have a lot going on in your mind as you're answering these, because you have to keep, there's actually 2 layers of typing in most tests, and they flip the dynamic about halfway through the test. So you really have to think about it. And it's just really fascinating, the information that you can get from these. So this is just a tool that, again, we wanted to make sure you knew about. If you didn't know about it, you can Google IAT tests. You can even just Google implicit bias tests or surveys and find those resources too. And like I said, in the vein of implicit bias, we're just going to send you the workshop we already did, because it was amazing. It had a panel, amazing speakers, amazing feedback of their own experiences and how they've been able to make changes in their own careers and in their organizations. And then lastly, this is one of the last slides for today, actually. Like Claire said, there's a lot of research already in the communities, already in our regions, already in our nation on these topics. And as we, as organizations, we're doing our own DEI work, starting it and planning workshops and doing things like that, we started digging in. And these are 3 reports that we particularly found useful. The first one is the one that Claire mentioned earlier, and I've got the links right in this PowerPoint so you can download the whole report. There's the More Than Numbers report. There's another one called Insight, Impact, and Equity, which I thought was really powerful because it talks about collecting demographic data. And it gets more intensively into what Claire was speaking to about why are you collecting data? How are you using it? Do you make decisions on it? What priority level are you using in your decision-making related to that data? And so it really digs in. It also gives you industry trends and insight into what was common in the last, say, decade and what's common now and where we're trending. And so there's some great stuff in that report. It's by Peak Grant Making. It's not really specifically a nonprofit focus report. It's kind of a grant maker's view of it, but it has great information in it about, like I said, the trends and sort of where we're headed as a sector. And I think you could get something out of it. And then the last one, nonprofit diversity efforts. That one is focused on the sector, not just grant makers. And that's the Center for Effective Philanthropy. And this one is a broad sort of research document. And I found these documents helpful to me in the last year as I was framing conversations, as we were planning, you know, as an organization, how to start these uncomfortable conversations with our various audiences, you know. And so some of these reports just really helped us understand better, you know, how to approach our own work. And I think they could do the same for you. If you Google DEI research or something like that, you will get a slew of information. I would encourage you to try to stay focused on research groups that understand our sector, because it is very different than other sectors, you know, and there are some unique challenges. And I think Claire got into some of that earlier when talking about data, but there's a ton of good stuff out there. And so we have 3 of them linked here just for you to sort of be able to dig in. And that is the end of our content. If there's anything that anyone would like to unmute and chat about, ask questions about, we do have some time. We reserve 75 minutes, so we're good until 15 after. I did want to encourage you to check out both of our websites for future events. We are collaborating quite a bit right now on a variety of you know, these more intensive training programs. We'd love to see you in them again. We also have here at the foundation a whole contingent of basic 101 workshops that are an hour-long introduction to the operational focuses of a nonprofit. So we teach like best practices of finance, of marketing, of grant writing, of board engagement. And so we have all of those on the schedule. If that's something that could benefit your staff, feel free to access that. And then I don't think I have any other content, so I'm going to stop sharing. And if anyone wants to unmute, feel free. It's been great to see your faces today. I hope that you enjoyed the workshop. It'll take a few hours for the recording to upload on Zoom, but once that's out, once that's ready, I will send this out. Maybe in the morning, tomorrow, I'll be able to send this out with some of the resource links and the actual recording for you and the PowerPoint. Well, if no one has any questions, I guess that's all we have today. Everyone's quiet. You're taking it all in, right? Yeah, okay. I'm familiar with that. I've been on the other side. Well, thanks for coming. We really appreciate working with you all. We're happy to be able to provide this sort of capacity building support, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate
Have a
your
great
time.
day.